We are building the biggest wargaming board ever. It's going to be a long journey, but here at Zorpazorp over the last few months, we have begun the task, and today we finish the first leg of that mighty quest. Welcome to the final episode of the first season of building the Imperial Palace on Terra. In our last two episodes, we began work on two massive structures: the cathedral centerpiece for the petitioner's city, the massive metropolis before the walls of the palace itself, and the defensive complexes that form the interiors of those very walls. And today, we look to complete those first two regions as we look towards joining them together into one massive mega gaming board. Starting off with those rampart and bastion interiors, we've already smashed out all the structural work, with everything you've seen so far being built in about 3 days. The Imperial Palace build is also doubling as part of our Mark of Calth Horus Heresy campaign scenery, and I only had 4 days to get this part of the board fully finished, as this was just a few weeks before Ollie arrived from Ireland to shoot the campaign, and the timeline was getting very tight indeed. So to finish this guy off, we need a really quick and easy paint scheme that is super effective for bringing this board to life. Up first was a huge prime job with rattle cans. I did an all-over coat with Rust-Oleum flat grey primer, and then a zenithal pass with age grey, just to create some quick and easy definition. All of the plastic GW Mechanicus components I'd actually kept removable, they weren't glued in yet, so they got a separate prime in grey, and then I tried zenithaling those with lead belcher just for something a little bit different. I had also kept a bunch of other consoles and griblies to use throughout this board and other boards from the campaign, like Minas Tirith and Osgiliath being converted to Leptius Numinous and Lanchi Port, so those all got a good prime as well. I then tested slapping down a simple acrylic black wash, as you can see here in this side-by-side, because I was sort of worried. You're not really supposed to wash 3D prints, but the prints are so good, it looked really great. You can have a look at that side-by-side, looks fantastic. So I did this all over the entire board and then let it dry. This took quite a while, there's a lot of surface area, but it was amazing for building up the grime and the texture on all of the flat surfaces, as well as the recesses. Then to help sell a few tiles as really this kind of Ultramar orbital station, I printed off a template of an Ultima and then cut it out, turning it into a big stencil, and took it outside and taped it down and weighted it down, and used some spray paint to make some big old ultramarine U's in bright white onto a couple of the floor tiles. You'll notice from the camera that this is done at about 3 AM in the dead of night. This is how pressed for time I was in the lead up to this campaign. Peeling it back is so satisfying. It's such an awesome feeling, and it was kind of at this moment when I really started to feel the board coming to life. I also don't have footage of it, but it was right now when I sprayed all of the doors a really nice kind of dark blue, again tying into that Ultramar vibe. When it comes to assembling this board into the Imperial City inner bastions and dungeons, I'll probably use this same stenciling technique for some really nice Imperial iconography. Then it was detail time. Now this was a crazy fast paint job. Basically pick out the pieces that would do enough to make the detail read to the eye. I did some reds and green colored panels on all the control consoles. There were little leather bags every now and then, and some silver and black guns lying around the place, and then a hell of a lot of black and grey cabling, and that was all achieved with contrast paint. Super fast and super efficient is the name of the game here. The final pass to add some real life and definition into the whole board was to take a brown oil wash and paint it into the recesses of the walls to show a buildup of dirt and grime, and to also tint the entire consoles just to shift them into a different warmer tone of grey so that the board wasn't so homogeneous in the detailed areas. I cannot stress enough just how much this final pass did to pretty much save the paint job. It went from super basic and bland to just good enough to be an amazing landscape to pack full of gorgeous models and look phenomenal on camera. The final details to finish off were those metallic pipes and griblies which needed to be glued in place and then painted up. These guys were starting from a bright silver, which is great for visual interest for the board, but it needed a bit of love to kind of tone it in and make it feel like it belonged. So they first got a heavy wash of brown burnt umber oil as I put each piece down, but I soon realized that wasn't far enough, so I started just stippling in neat brown oil paint right into that wet layer, and then teasing and thinning and blending it into the recesses with the wash to really build up a huge amount of grime and lubrication and general mechanical smearage until they really belonged in the environment. I then painted up our beautiful power cells, which play a crucial role in the story, and dotted them all over the place, picked out a few last details like some sexy green cables coming out from under the Mortian tilt tilting tiles just to make that area pop, and then bam! We have an absolutely fierce interior layout that's going to be amazing in the short term for our Mark of Calth campaign, and it's also going to be an incredible foundation for the inner workings of the defenses of the Imperial Palace. Here we can see the board in action during the campaign, and I'm so happy with how it's turned out so far. And as we continue on this crafting journey, I could absolutely add to it, maybe build some of the really key rooms to connect into the layout based on epic locations from the narrative of the Siege of Terra. Remember guys, if you want to grab any of the pieces used in this video, including the kill zone scenery or the STL files from Morshan or Nub, or even your plastic GW scenery, use my links down in the description. Now, as we explored in the build video for this part of the board, this fully modular landscape was planned for 2 setups, and you can see some gameplay on the first setup in the latest battle reports from the Mark of Calth campaign. The full playlist is linked down below, but before we get this bad boy set up in its second configuration for the first version of our Siege of Terra megaboard, we need to return to our massive cathedral and the surrounding buildings that make up the Petitioner's City. Now, last week we saw our massive cathedral come together. A 3D printed mega build using the War Layer STL files, which you can download below in the description and the top comment, and she is looking an absolute beast as the centerpiece of one of the administratum structures of the Petitioner's City, a ramshackle, sprawling urban development before the walls of the palace itself. But this centerpiece needs streets and buildings all around it for a nice little war zone to game on. Long-time viewers will remember the beginnings of our Hive City build last year, where we smashed together some towering skyscrapers from the Games Workshop Cities of Death plastic kits, both new and old, as well as the modular tiling system we developed for our streets and our foundations by smashing apart the old Sector Imperialis battle tiles. We built these fully modular monoliths and got them to a nice battle-ready paint scheme with some airbrush work and glazes and then some acrylic washes, but now it's time to fully transport them to the intense urban combat of the Siege of Terra. Up first was our roads, which got a dark grey prime and then a nice little spritzy zenithal with light grey to accent the raised details before being slathered in a messy acrylic black wash. This is a great starter as it dries with a really grimy kind of effect that leaves a lot of tide marks and stains. To bring in a pop of colour finally to this grey board, I gave all the guttering a blue-grey tint through the airbrush and then gave all the roadways a nice little accenting dry brush in lighter greys just to pick up that raised detail a little more. I also used this exact scheme for all of our upper level gangways before hitting them with a black enamel wash just to really get some lovely recessed detail in all those nice balustrades, as well as a nice little staining effect. Then jumping back on my airbrush, I sprayed all the metal pieces, the manholes and the various doors with an acrylic lacquer black, and then gave them a series of metallic dry brushes over that black, working in bolt gunmetal and brass scorpion for a lovely hammered brass vibe. Just to remember, if you're picking up any Heresy goodies or any Warhammer and hobby supplies at all, remember to use my affiliate links, including the wonderful Gap Games here in Australia, as well as stockists in the US, EU, UK, New Zealand, and recently we added a wonderful stockist over in New Zealand, the wonderful Kapiti Hobbies, who are just some awesome folks. Scotty over there is just a champion. All of those links send some dollary dues back to the channel to support Zorpazorp, and they get you the greatest prices for all of your hobby supplies. With the roads done, it's time to return to our GW skyscrapers and turn them from battle ready to grimdark ready. And we're going to start with our really tall white spire. First, I grabbed a little bit more grey blue through my airbrush to match the foundation to the side paneling on the roads, and then got the same tide marky acrylic black wash and subsequent dry brush to bring up all of those little panel details. Then to bring the buildings to life a bit, I added a bunch of metallic details to all of the kind of trim and fancy pieces with gold and silver on the walls itself, and then I hit some of the exposed piping that had been blown open in the foundation destruction with some brassy tones just like the manholes. While the metallics were out, I also picked out all of the steel flooring details like the grates and the plating with some nice silvers, and then all of those surfaces got a nice black enamel wash. Then I smashed everything together just to have a quick look at how it was all coming together, and yep, I am very, very happy with this. But our next big task is the simplest weathering we'll do, but it just adds so much to the city as a whole. I grabbed some more of my super smooth acrylic lacquer from Scale Modeling Supplies and blasted it through my Dragon Air onto all of those ruined edges on every building to give a nice kind of burned, scorched vibe. It has a different level level of subtlety depending on the color of the building you're putting it down on, but it's just fantastic across all of them. I especially love it on the sandy skyscraper, which is definitely shaping up as my favorite building out of all of them. But now it's time to bring out the big guns. Yup, here come the oil paints. Now I actually did this paint job way back in August last year, but it was my first experience with oils, and as I'm sure anyone who has watched the channel since will know, I just fell in love with them. Lamp black, burnt umber, burnt sienna, and yellow ochre are my weapons of choice. I started by grabbing my sandy skyscraper and smashing some neat burnt umber into the recesses, and then coming back in with a clean brush dipped in oil thinner and feathering and blending out that grime to create a lovely smear in the recesses that graduates out across the paneling. I then did the same thing in a few spots with my other oils here and there. The yellow ochre looks really nice as a highlight on this sandy scraper, and now I am just loving this grimy aesthetic. So that first building looked incredible. We've got such high contrast with the bone and the brown grime, but this next building, the red manufactorum, it's already very grim and dour, so I think I'm just going to lean into that and mostly use black and dark brown, but maybe try experimenting with some contrasty lighter stuff. We'll see how we go. Before we dive in, a huge shout out to my Patreons and channel members. You guys are a huge part of why all this is possible, so a big thank you for your support. And if you want to join the ranks here or go in the draw to win some wicked goodies and giveaways, check out our Patreon, or just smash that little join button down there next to subscribe. Go on, give it a little cuddle. I found that across the next 3 colored buildings, the dark red, the grey, and the white, the neat feathering grime really only worked with the black. In these color palettes, the other colors just kind of didn't really click, but I'm still absolutely stoked with the finish this technique has added to all of the buildings. The black on these other ones almost looks a bit like extra scorch and burn marks as well, which is really cool. The paint schemes are now looking fantastic. It's time to add the final details to blend them into the ruined landscape, and that is of course rubble. Just like our main cathedral last week, this is a simple process of slapping down some Geek Gaming fast drying basing glue and then dumping a whole bunch of base ready. I use a custom blend of grimdark city rubble and city rubble to get the perfect urban detritus and sprinkled it everywhere. Then once that had set in place, absolutely soaked the living emperor out of it with isopropyl alcohol and matte scenic sealant to lock it down hard and ensure it stands the rigors of gaming. One great benefit of this process is the fast-drying basing glue from Geek Gaming is a ductile, impact-resistant gel that doesn't go completely hard and brittle like PVA. It stays strong and tacky, so it actually does a great job of strengthening some of the dodgier plastic glue joins on all of the modular levels. Remember that the whole Geek Gaming range is available from my own shop, Zorpazorp.com, linked down in the description. Then, with our ruined cityscape of the Petitioner's City and the interiors of the mighty Imperial bastions ready for battle, it was time to throw them down into a massive setup to see just how far this project has finally come. Our first city setup mixes some of the modular components of the cathedral board with the Cities of Death buildings and also some of the Middle-earth Osgiliath pieces to make a really long 8x4 foot urban landscape for an amazing breakthrough blitzkrieg style mission for the second episode of the Mark of Calth campaign, the Assault on Landship Port. Link below if you'd like to see this board in action. And then, as I mentioned before, the third episode, Gilliman's Kill Squad launching a teleportation strike on the Zetz and Veridyard orbital station, showcases the Bastion interiors in their first planned setup. But then for the finale of the Mark of Calth campaign, the massive board with 50,000 points of models on the table at once, we set up these 2 pieces into a board that will be much more reminiscent of when these boards are used for the Siege of Terra campaign. And it's absolutely mental. Now, while these 2 landscapes aren't physically linked, as in the Mark of Calth, the Bastion interior style board represents a space station above the city, the next phase of this board will be to build the mighty ramparts and Imperial City walls that join the interior and exterior components into one long cohesive landscape. It's been really nice to be able to use the Mark of Calth campaign as a nice way to kickstart our Imperial Palace build, and I can't wait to get started on the next phase once we've moved to New Zealand. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next one.